the United States right now than there were in the 1700s. Let me show you one example. I could go through multiple examples, but let me show you one example. This is from about the late 1800s, about 1882, somewhere around in there, 1882. This is an area that most of you, when you see it on TV today, would say it's one of the most beautiful areas that you've ever seen. Anyone have any idea where this is at? This is Billings, Montana. Look at all the trees in Billings, Montana. This is in the late 1800s. There are no trees in Billings, Montana. Here's Billings, Montana today. Look at the trees. It's amazing. Think about El Dorado. Why is El Dorado called El Dorado? Because when the early pioneers and the settlers came over the Flint Hills, they looked down on the Walnut River Valley, and they saw the Walnut River going through the Walnut River Valley in a field of yellow grass. There were no trees. Because wildfires and the way that Native Americans hunted and everything kept trees out of this area. This entire area from here all the way through western Kansas had virtually no trees anywhere. Yet we came in, we started building communities, we started building society, we started planting trees, and we actually have more trees in the United States right now than we did in the 1700s. So it's not about saving trees. But when you go out and you start recycling paper, the problem with recycling paper is someone has to go out and collect the paper. And as you go out and you collect all the paper, and then you sort all the paper, you're releasing greenhouse emissions through transportation, through gathering, through sorting, and all of that stuff. And then once you get it sorted, then you have to decompose it and tear it down back into a pulp, again producing more emissions. And then you have to go through the regular process of turning it into a new sheet of paper. It actually produces way more greenhouse gases than going out and cutting down a tree that is grown in a crop in a regulated area that's really close to the paper mill, bringing it in, making pulp, making a new sheet of paper. But that's not the way that we think about it. We don't even question the very basic level of getting into taking care of the world. You've got to recycle paper. And yet that is more harmful to the planet than using new paper. Okay? See what I mean about different perspectives? There's different ways of looking at things. It doesn't make one right, doesn't make one wrong, but there are different things that we should consider, that we should take into account that as we're forming our views, as we're forming where we want to go. So that's why the perspective I kind of want you to break the frame on, look at energy and perspective a little bit different, and really take a look at it from the perspective of kind of new eyes. Okay, so where we're going to go today is we're going to go around the world. We have to look at energy and poverty as a world issue because we're talking about energy, and energy is a world commodity. We don't get to set the price. America doesn't get to set the price. It is determined by what the price is in the world market. Why? Because especially when it comes to oil and natural gas, you can put a barrel of oil, pump it out of the ground here in Kansas, put it on a ship it all the way to China, and when it gets to China, you have the same amount of energy in that barrel as you did when it left Kansas. So if you can get a better price in China, then you can sell it in China. That's what makes it a global commodity. Here's one that will blow you away. Consider natural gas. You ever been driving down the road and you pass one of those big natural gas trucks? You know what I'm talking about? The rounded trucks, and they say LNG on them, or petroleum natural gas. Petroleum liquid gas on them. Have you ever thought about this? Natural gas is one of the most dynamic resources that we have on this planet. Because when you take natural gas and you condense it down and turn it into a liquid and put it inside that truck, when that truck's going down the road, when it gets to its destination source and they turn it into natural gas again for utilization, that one truck becomes over 600 trucks of natural gas. That's how much it condenses and expands. So every time you see one of those trucks going by, that is 600 trucks of natural gas in the gas form. Okay? So that makes it an incredible resource that you can ship all over the world and condense it down, ship it over, imagine one of those big tankers. And you condense it down, fill it up, tanker up, and ship it across the world. When it gets to its destination source, it's expanded back into natural gas. And when it's expanded back into natural gas, that just became 600 500 of those tankers wherever it lands. So it makes it a world commodity. We have to look at energy from a world perspective and then bring it back down to the local perspective. Poverty is no different. Poverty is a world issue. There's poverty in every aspect of the world. So I've had the privilege of working in 28 countries around the world. A lot of what I've done is put together teams of teenagers, take them over to another country, and when you take them over to another country, then put them together with teenagers from that country, and we do all kinds of building projects, mostly in third world nations, very poverty-stricken places. One of those places that I worked was a country called Pakistan. Most of us are familiar with Pakistan. Pakistan is a very energy-deprived country. It's starting to change a little bit, but it's a very energy-deprived country. When I was there, I had about 60 kids that I had to feed every single day. Barbara, do you want to cook for 60 kids? I don't think so. I had 60 kids that I had to feed every single day. And so every day, I would start the same way because there is no refrigeration in Pakistan. They just don't have the energy. In fact, in a lot of towns, at that point in time, a lot of towns, the electricity would only be turned on for 2 hours a day. And you'd use that 2 hours to run your water pump as much as you possibly could to fill up the tanks on top of your house so that you'd have enough water to make it to the next day. And you would constantly fill it up. Then you would use the energy for something else, but you would fill up your water tanks. So there was no refrigeration. So I would start every single day the exact same way. I would get up in the morning and I would go down to the butcher shop. And when I went down to the butcher shop, I didn't go in there and say, okay, I'll take those T-bones and I'll take those ribeyes. It wasn't that way. When I went down to the butcher shop, I'd say, okay, I'll take those 10 chickens that are running around right there, and I'll take that one goat. Because there's no refrigeration, whatever you slaughter that day, you eat that day. The butcher would immediately start harvesting those animals and cutting those animals up and getting them ready for me. While he was getting those animals ready, I got a goat and 10 chickens every single day. When he was getting those ready for me, then I would go down across town, down by the river, and I'd get down by the river where there was the ice house. And I'd buy the block of ice that was going to be the only ice, the only coolant we had for the entire day. And it'd be a block that would be about that long by that tall, by that wide. We'd buy that block of ice, put it onto a cart, wrap it up in burlap, put it up onto a cart that would be pulled by a water buffalo, and then we'd start walking back towards the butcher shop so that we could load the meat on top of the ice, and then when we'd go back to the camp, and we'd start preparing the food so we could start our day. I did that every single morning. Well, I noticed that when I was going along, there was all these little kids, little boys. They would be 6, 7, 8 years old. That would be following me around everywhere. And at first, I thought it was just because I was the crazy white guy that was walking through their town. You know, when you're white especially in the backwoods of the Torah Mountains and the lower Himalayan mountains or the Indus Valley, there's not very many white people that are out there. So you tend to draw a crowd a little bit. And I thought that's what it was. I finally realized one day that's not what was going on. What these boys were doing is we were going along, and as we were going along, we're following behind this water buffalo, pulling the cart, going along, and the water buffalo defecates on the ground. Now, for those of you that went to KU, that means pooped. I'm teasing. K-State's an agricultural college. You'd think they would know. So anyway, so this water buffalo pooped on the ground. When the water buffalo pooped on the ground, then it turned into a mad frenzy. All of these kids started racing to the side of the road, ripping up grass on the side of the road, then racing back to see who could get to that buffalo patty first. And the first one back to the buffalo patty immediately reached down and grabbed it, picked it up, and started working the grass into the patty. Needless to say, I was intrigued. So I started watching this kid, and he starts working it into the patty, and then he starts walking away from us. So I followed him. And I walked with him, and I followed him all the way to his house. He finally got to his house, and he flattened it out into a nice flat patty. When he got to a nice flat patty, he slapped it on the south side of his house. Why? Because he's going to leave it on the south side of his house, and he's going to let it dry out in the sun until it starts peeling off the wall. Once it starts peeling off the wall, now it's good. You can take it inside the house, and that's going to be the fuel that they're going to heat their homes with, and they're going to cook their meals on. The exact same way the settlers, because there were no trees here in El Dorado, the way the settlers heated their homes and cooked their meals. They would go out and collect buffalo patties. And that's what they're doing. These kids that I saw in Pakistan, and here's a picture of what it looks like. This is a wall in Pakistan, and all of those handprints up there, those are water buffalo patties that are being dried out for fuel. And all over Pakistan, you see houses that are covered in these. Those kids, those 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, have zero chance of competing with my kids and my grandkids. Zero. Why? Because while my kids and my grandkids are learning math, they're learning reading, they're learning technology, they're learning science, they're learning all of these skills that are enable them to advance and make money in life, these kids are spending their entire day collecting energy for their family. And it's not just in Pakistan. It is all over the world. Here in Egypt, I spent some time in Egypt. I've been to Egypt on three different trips. And what's amazing about Egypt is they got a pretty modern system, especially around Cairo. But when you see that modern system around Cairo, they don't have as much energy, but they have a lot of manual labor. And so they were actually building a highway. You know how if you go to Wichita right now, because there's always construction in Wichita. If you go to Wichita right now and you see them building those flyovers, this is actually where they were building a flyover in Pakistan, and they were pouring their columns 5 gallons a bucket of concrete at a time, mixing it by hand, pouring it 5 gallons at a time. Why? Because they don't have access to affordable and reliable energy. I worked down in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and right where all three of those really meet, the triad, which you've heard in the news as the triad, where a lot of people are trying to come from there to the United States because it's so harsh there. It's harsh there because there's been a lot of war and violence and other political unrest in that region. It's way up in the mountains. What's amazing about this region is, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong picture. What's this picture? And what's amazing about this region is this region up there, there's corn growing everywhere. There's corn growing everywhere. And back in the 1980s and early 90s, they had some real political unrest. And you had people that were eating themselves to death because they had corn growing everywhere. They were able to make their own bread. But because it's a very mountainous region up there, there's no nutrients in the soil. And so they would grow corn, they would have the corn, they would cook the corn or turn the corn into bread, eat the corn, and they were starving to death because the corn had no nutrients in it. So up there, because they don't have fertilizer, which comes from oil and natural gas, most of it, because they didn't have fertilizers that they could utilize, what we would do is we would go in and help them build tilapia ponds to grow tilapia fish. That gave them a protein source that they could eat from, but also gave them fish that they could then harvest and use as fertilizer to put nutrients back into the corn. This is happening all over the world. What I showed you up here, this is in, where's this at? Oh, this is India. This is India. In India, this is a kitchen. This is a home kitchen that you're looking at right here. And you can see, it's really hard because it's blurry, but down here in the bottom right corner of this blue tent, you can see the propane tank where they're cooking on that propane tank. And they only cook certain things on the propane tank when the main thing that they use is they use firewood. And they harvest firewood and utilize firewood everywhere. So I share all of that to say that it is a global issue. If energy is a global issue, poverty is also a global issue. Because what is the definition of energy? Energy is the ability to do work. What is it that enables people to rise within society? The ability to accomplish work, the ability to build things, to make things, to do things. If you do not have access to affordable, reliable energy, then it holds you back because it prevents you from being able to do work. What's interesting about that is a lot of times we look at people in poverty and we say they just need to go out and work, but they don't have access to affordable, reliable energy. How can they do the work when they don't have access to it? In fact, when we build stuff in Pakistan, Pakistan is one of my favorite places. I talk about it all the time. But when we build stuff in Pakistan, I would go down to the lumber yard. I wouldn't go down to the lumber yard and pick out my 2x4s, my 2x6s, and so on and so forth. I'd go down and I'd pick out a tree. And so I'd pick out a tree, and then I would tell them how I want them to cut that tree down and get the boards that I wanted so that we could do our building project. And they would start cutting that tree down by hand and cutting it down. They might have a bandsaw there, but that bandsaw was oftentimes run using a donkey or run by hand. And they would cut down that tree into the planks that I wanted, and I had paid for them before we even started cutting it down. So it's a very different world that we're living in. Now, why does that matter to us? Why should that matter to us here in the United States? Because a majority of the world is energy deficient. Right now, I'm going to blow you away with some stats. Right now, in the world, about 60% of the population of the world is energy deprived, which means they don't have access to affordable, reliable energy at the levels they would like to have. Add to that, about 40% of the population of the world, they still depend on firewood or traditional biofuels to heat their homes, cook their meals, or both. 40% of the world. This one will really blow you away. About 20% of the population of the world, right now today, about 20% of the population of the world today survives every single year on less energy than it takes to run the refrigerator in your home. They use no more energy than that. And they all want more energy. They all want access to that affordable, reliable energy to be able to do the work that will allow them to compete on a world market. Now, that's important because our world has been talking for years and years now, our part of the world has been talking for years about transition, right? We're going to transition. Right now, we have 60% of the population of the world that's energy deprived, 20% that uses less energy than it takes to run the refrigerator. And we're not worried about how we're going to produce more energy. We're worried about where that energy is going to come from rather than how we're going to produce more energy. Add to that, the United Nations predicts that by the year 2050, between now and 2050, we are going to add 1.7 billion people to the planet. The more people you have, the more energy it takes to provide for them. We have a real energy crisis that is coming. We have a real energy crisis that is coming. In fact, the EIA, the IEA, and the United Nations all agree that by the year 2050, we're going to need to be producing 28% more energy per year than we currently produce today. And that estimate came out before the onset of AI. And AI takes a tremendous amount of energy. So we have a real issue. We have really something that is really going to impact us. And because energy is a world issue, poverty is also a world issue. In fact, if you look at this map right here, it shows you the poverty inequality in the world. And if you look at the countries that are the browns and yellow, the browns and the reds that are up there, that's where that 20% of the population that survives on less energy than it takes to run the refrigerator, that's where they live. That's where the people that are 40% that are using predominantly firewood or biofuels to heat their homes and cook their meals, that's where they predominantly live. In fact, it shows because this is the map for where poverty exists in the world. Here's the map for where energy usage is in the world. They're the exact opposite. They have a direct connection to each other. In fact, when it comes to looking at the usage of energy, specifically the usage of oil and natural gas, what we find is that there is a direct correlation between the utilization of oil and natural gas and poverty. There's a direct correlation. In the countries that have embraced fossil fuels as a whole, but specifically oil and natural gas usage, in those countries, infant death rates are at the lowest point in human history. Life expectancy is at the highest point in human history. Climate-related deaths are at the lowest point in human history. Gross domestic product and individual wealth are at the highest point in human history. Why? Because we have the energy to do the work that enables us to better our lives. Does that make sense? And it's not just about the energy. And the reason I specify oil and natural gas is not like coal and oil and natural gas. You can bottle up, you can put in barrels, you can put in ships, and you can send them anywhere around the world, and you have the same amount of energy, right? The difference is oil and natural gas are also utilized to make all kinds of products that we depend upon every day. In fact, about 96% of the things you touch every single day are made from oil and natural gas in some way. 96% of the things you touch every single day. It enables us to make, if you go into a nursing, or excuse me, go into an emergency room, the top 13 machines that are in that emergency room are predominantly made from petroleum. It gives us the technology. That phone you're holding, about 60% of the parts of that phone are made from petroleum. It enables us to do all kinds of things, make all kinds of products that make life better, which increase life expectancy, decrease infant death rates. It helps us live in a better world, makes life better. So there is a direct correlation between energy and poverty. So here is the world population that I was talking about. I should have showed you this slide while I was talking about it. This is why I don't normally do PowerPoints. Is because I kind of go all over the place. So this is world population of the world. And you can see where the population of the world, where we're at right now, add 1.7 billion people to that, and we're over 9 billion people by the year 2050. That is directly going up in that direction. Here, I'll show you the utilization of energy. Now, when you're looking at these, what we're looking at is in British thermal units from the year 2010 to 2050. Now, here's what I want you to notice, how the climate is beginning to change. And the reason that you know the climate's beginning to change is because this probably conflicts with what a lot of people think is actually happening in the world. What a lot of people think is actually happening in the world is that renewables are incredibly increasing. They're incredibly increasing, and everything else is beginning to drop off because we're transitioning, right? But the reality is, if you look at it, every single energy source in the world is continuing to grow, even coal. Now, coal's not growing in the United States because we have kind of transitioned away from it. We've gone more towards natural gas, but coal is growing in the world. China specifically, there was a point in time between 2020 and 2024 where they were opening a new coal plant in the country on the average of one every week because they were utilizing that cheap resource to try and get energy to the people in their country. So it is a dynamic. It is a dynamic part of the correlation between this energy and poverty. Now, here's one I want to show you right here. The average monthly gasoline price for all grades. And you see that the dollars, this has been adjusted for dollars today going forward, that we have been talking about how high our gas prices are, how expensive our gas prices are. But if you look historically, we are actually at some of our lowest gas prices in history because our affordability index, the ability to afford it, how much money we actually have, has increased at the same time that the price of gasoline has increased. In fact, the United States has the most affordable gas of any country in the world. There's some other countries where you can pay less, but the affordability, you don't have the money to pay. Here, we may have to pay a little more, but we have the money to pay, which on the affordability index means that we have the cheapest gasoline of any country in the world. Now, the affordability percentage is based on the consumption that an affordable housing burden is less than 30% of income spent on energy and 20% of housing costs. So this goes into what I was talking about on the affordability. On affordability, when you take into these factors, who can afford energy and who cannot afford energy. It's not about what is the price of energy. It's about whether it is affordable and reliable for people, especially people in poverty. Now, that is a big and very important distinction. It's a big, important distinction because a lot of times we might think, okay, you're talking about the entire world. You're talking about all these other countries that are out there. But what does that really have to do with us? It's as important here in Kansas as it is anywhere else in the world. In fact, if you look at the statistics, and what you'll find is that before the pandemic, the average middle-class Kansas family, so the average middle-class Kansas family was spending 2.5% of their total income for their energy needs. That's not bad, right? Following the pandemic, now the average middle-class Kansas family is paying about 6% of their total income for their energy needs. Now, why? A lot of this is because of regulations, and a lot of this is because of transition, the oncoming of renewables that have come on. All of those have elevated, in my opinion, artificially elevated energy costs to where now the middle class family is paying 6% of their total income. Now, you saw that equation I showed up there a while ago. We're not going to go into a whole lot of math on that. You saw the equation I showed up a while ago. What that tells us is economists have long held that if you get above 6% of your total income being spent on your energy needs, that's when you begin to dramatically change your lifestyle. That's when people start cutting back instead of growing. And we're right on that verge. Now, that's for the average middle class Kansas family. What's amazing is before the pandemic, the average family that was living below the poverty line was spending about 8% of their total income on their energy needs. Today, depending which county you live in, the average family that lives below the poverty line is spending between 13 and 15% of their total income on their energy needs. That's devastating. So a lot of people say, well, they just need to use less energy, right? But they can't. In fact, the average family that lives below the poverty line utilizes about the same amount of energy, even in a smaller home. They utilize about the same amount of energy as a middle-class family. Why? Because their homes are less efficient, their cars are less efficient, their appliances are less efficient. All that less efficiency forces them to have to utilize more energy. Energy is the ability to do work. The more we escalate energy prices, the more we push people into poverty. Around the world and here in Kansas, it happens both places. And why are we doing this? Why have we been so gung-ho to go down this road to try and to manipulate energy markets, manipulate energy sources in order to go in a specific direction? Why? Because of the environment. It is an environmental issue. And I argue it is just as much a part of the environment as what we talked about to start out this speech, which was paper. It's the same thing. The argument that we have for why we're doing what we're doing really doesn't pan out. And we're beginning to see that today. Because the greatest threat to the environment today is poverty. Go into any third world country and walk around and tell me how their environment works. Go into any town you want to go in and go into the poorest parts of the town and tell me if their environment's as good as everybody else's. Poverty directly impacts the environment. The more people you push into poverty, the more the environment is going to suffer. So much so that we finally have started seeing a huge change. I guarantee you, probably very few of you have read any articles in the past year about energy transition. They're not there. They're not in the newspapers. People are not talking about energy transition at this point. Why? People that were so gung-ho on it for years and years and years, all of a sudden, it's disappeared from our news. And the reason is because of the onset of AI has really impacted the tech world, and the tech world has been very big on the environmental movement, but they began to realize we're not going to have enough energy. Our network, our grid is not ready for the technology that we're coming out with, and they began to see the signs. So much so that here's a quote from Bjorn Lomborg. Bjorn Lomborg is of I just lost it. Copenhagen Institute, and he is not a pro oil and gas person at all. In fact, he's very much against oil and natural gas and the usage of oil and natural gas, but he's also a realist. and he understands the importance of energy in the lives of people. And so he says up here, the main environmental challenge of the 21st century is poverty. When you don't know where your next meal is coming from, it's hard to consider the environment 100 years down the line. And he has been a huge advocate on helping people understand that if we do not find a way to get more affordable, reliable energy to people, that is going to be the worst thing that ever happened to the environment as a whole. But it's not just think tank guys. There's also a guy that maybe some of you are familiar with by the name of Bill Gates. Now, he has been a huge energy transition supporter for decades and decades and decades. And he recently just shocked the world by coming out with an essay. And this is a part of the essay. It says, although climate change will have serious consequences, particularly for people in the poorest countries, it will not lead to humanity's demise. Gates wrote, this is a chance to refocus on the metric that should count even more than emissions and temperature change, improving lives. People all around the world are beginning to change. They're beginning to understand that our greatest danger, the greatest danger we have going forward, is not where our energy is going to come from. It is, are we going to have enough to keep society going? Are we going to have enough to give people the energy they need to do the work that they need to do, to be able to pull themselves out of poverty, to be able to create the lives that they want? In fact, recently, about 3 years ago, I believe it was, there was 1,609 scientists that all signed a World Climate Declaration that says there is no climate emergency. This is what you're beginning to hear in the news. This is what you're beginning to hear people talk about, is how are we going to get more energy? In fact, look at our state. Look at all the states around. You've been hearing a lot about nuclear plants being started up, being commissioned, being put in place. You've been hearing a lot about natural gas plants being reopened. Why? Because we're desperate to find enough energy. We have to figure out how to produce more than 28% more energy per year than we currently do at this point. And that is not just to give the rich people what they need to go have fun. The primary motive is because people are beginning to see, if we don't do this, energy becomes more unaffordable for those in the lower class. That's going to push more people into poverty. And that is the worst thing that can happen to the environment as a whole. So, I'll skip that. So where I want to end is I want to end with, I don't even know what time it is. 12:40. Okay, so where I want to end is I want to end with a real life example about how energy, and specifically oil and natural gas, dynamically impact people's lives and help make people's lives better. How many of you remember back in the late 80s, 1980s, remember the Ethiopian famine? Remember the Ethiopian famine? If you don't remember it, let me give you a hint. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones that make a brighter day. So let's start here. You remember that? Okay. And so the whole idea was we need to give to help these people out. Yeah, no one's ever asked me to come sing something. No one has ever asked me to do that. So we did the whole We Are the World campaign. Why? Because tens of thousands of people were dying from famine. You had a drought in Ethiopia that was wiping people off of the planet. And so they started the We Are the World campaign. Stevie Wonder out there singing, and all the artists joined together to try and save the people of Ethiopia. What you probably don't know is that in 2016, Ethiopia had the worst drought in recorded history. And probably none of you ever even heard about it. I don't think it made the news. No one ever talked about it. Why? Because very, very few people were impacted and died from that drought, even though it was way worse drought than in the 1980s. So there was people that worked the 1980s drought, that they were curious. Why? Why did it change? Why did tens of thousands of people die back in the 1980s? And now virtually no one's dying. They're suffering, but they're not dying. Why? So they went back to Ethiopia to try and determine what was the difference. What was the difference? And they found a whole bunch of unique differences. I won't go through all of them. They found a whole bunch of unique differences. Number one was that Ethiopia, between the two, had built thousands and thousands of miles of asphalt roads. Asphalt comes from wood. Asphalt roads that connected communities all over the country. They had bought thousands and thousands of vehicles, predominantly Toyota trucks that ran on gasoline, so that you could move products and people around and medications around on these new roads that were there. They found that they had medical facilities that were building medicine and able to create medicine. Now, about 95% of medications depend upon petroleum to make them. They found that they had built fertilizer plants all over the country where they were using oil and natural gas to get fertilizer so they could enrich the soil, so that they could get more food out of the soil that they could harvest on the mill. They found that they had irrigation pumps that were predominantly diesel-run pumping stations that would pump irrigation water all over the country to help them water crops even in the middle of a drought. And it went on and on and on. And every single one of them was made possible by oil and natural gas. It's because they embraced oil and natural gas. It goes back exactly to what I said. You can follow a direct correlation to every country that begins to utilize oil and natural gas, how it dynamically improves the well-being of the people of that country through the products, the materials, the energy that it gives to the people, and the revenue that it gives people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and not have to live in poverty. There is a huge and direct correlation between energy and poverty. And people are beginning to wake up to it. I've been saying this for 9 years now. First time that I actually did this presentation was about 9 years ago. And I've been saying it for 9 years. And people now are you're starting to hear people talk about it in the national media. You're starting to hear people talk about it at world summits, where they're talking about how are we going to secure energy for our people, because people are realizing we're in real trouble if we don't learn how to grow our energy. And that's going to take utilizing every source of energy available. I'm not anti anything. I think some energy sources are better than others, but I'm not anti anything. I am pro giving people the resources they need to be able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And for that, we're going to need every available source of energy we can possibly find in order to keep up with the growing demands of our world. So I hope that maybe that makes you think a little different about both energy and poverty, and maybe take a little different perspective and do a little bit more digging into that. Because if you truly care about the environment, I fully believe that the number one thing that you should care about is how do we pull people out of poverty? The number one thing that will change the environment for the positive is when fewer people are in poverty. Because I don't care what energy source you're using, it is better than cow dung. It is better than the air particles that come, the emissions that come. It is better than cow dung. And one of our great priorities as a society, we often say the society is judged by how they treat the people who are the worst off in their communities. And I believe that there's a judgment that is coming on us in the form of energy, that if we don't really invest in figuring out how to provide people with affordable, reliable energy, we really are going to destroy our environment. That should be our number one priority. So with that, I'll stop and be happy to take any questions or tomatoes or anything else you want to throw at me. Yes?
On one of those slides, nuclear was significantly lower than everything else. Is that because it's not as efficient, or are you just like scared of it, or?
Yeah. Let me hang on. I'm going to turn that off because I don't want my answer on film.
Oh, you want to stop this?
Huh?
Do you want me to stop this?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
The answer to that is very simple. When it comes to electricity generation, not in other things, but predominantly electricity generation, nuclear is the only viable energy source out there that could instantly replace fossil fuels. It's the only one. They could. But people are deathly afraid of nuclear. And so we have shied away from it. We've heard about Chernobyl. We've heard about 3 Mile Island. We've heard about all of these meltdowns. The meltdown in Japan. And we've heard about, and we're deathly afraid. We've seen too many mutant movies, right? Where we turn animals into all kinds of mutants out there. And we're deathly afraid of nuclear. And so we have shied away from it, and we have not. But you're beginning to see that change. Tennessee just opened up a couple of nuclear plants. Kansas is looking at some nuclear plants. You're beginning to see that change. And the reality is here's one thing you have to remember is almost all of our refineries, like that model that's right over there, the one that's the model of the one here in El Dorado, most of our refineries, the last full-scale, full-line refinery that was built in the United States was built in like 1979. We've added to them, we've changed them and stuff. We built smaller versions that refine specific lines. But the last full-scale refinery was built in 1979. The last real nuclear plants, up until recently, they were also built in the 1970s. Technology has come a long ways since the 1970s. Nuclear today is not what it was in the 1970s. So I think you're beginning to see that change. And I think you're going to see, it's going to take probably 20 years before they really start coming online. But I think in the next 20 years, you're going to see a real big uptick in nuclear. Even in like France and Germany, where they shut down all of the nuclear plants when COVID hit and the Russian pipeline was cut off, they immediately started reopening their nuclear and their natural gas plants that are there. And so I think you're going to see that change over the next 20 years. Yes, sir.
What about the race to control the energy resources? Where's that going to lead?
Same place it always leads. A lot of conflict, a lot of negotiation. It is significant. It is significant who is going to control the energy world. And whatever you think about Trump, that's what it doesn't really matter. That's what's driving a lot of the decisions that he's making right now is trying to secure future energy for the United States. So like in Venezuela, I'll use Venezuela as an example. And we're a non-political organization, so I don't have a dog in the fight. I just look at it from the perspective of, okay, what really is going on here? In Venezuela, 20 years ago, you had 20% of the oil that went through Gulf Coast refineries in the United States came from Venezuela. So Venezuela turned socialist. The nation nationalized all the oil and gas and took them away from American companies. Well, then you had Gulf Coast refineries that had to retool their refineries to be able to use more Permian oil and more Canadian oil to be able to produce gasoline and diesel and all the products that they get there. So they had to refit and change that because we lost that Venezuelan oil. And what Trump is trying to do there is secure that Venezuelan oil, give it back to the majors, Chevron, Exxon, all the majors, so that they can process it. We have that energy source that's favorable towards us, not just taking it, but buying it from Venezuela, which hadn't been an option because they've been selling first of all, they haven't been able to extract as much because they don't know how to do it. And they've been selling what they have been able to extract to China, Russia, Cuba, and those countries that are our enemies. So, a lot of it was not just getting more oil, because the reality is that oil probably, if everybody just jumped and got into it and went after it, it would still take 3 to 5 years before we'd see any impact from that oil. Why? Because it's going to take tens of billions, over $10 billion investments to even bring it back to the levels of 20 years ago. And it's going to take years to build that infrastructure to bring it back to where it was 20 years ago. And then you're going to have refineries that are going to have to retool again to be able to process that oil because it's a low grade quality of oil. And so none of this is about what's happening immediately. It's more about long term. How do we provide enough energy for our nation? And you got a lot of nations that are fighting for that right now in making moves, trying to acquire energy. So, and it's going to continue that way.
I know a big part of that 28% is just going to be the increase in population that we need that energy, but what do you feel like, what are your thoughts on the AI, kind of the jump on that? What's a
Yeah.
big, what are your thoughts on the AI being a part of that?
Well, the thing about AI is a lot of people are talking about, is it going to be an AI bubble or is it not going to be a bubble? And, to me, it's going to be somewhat of a bubble, but not nearly the bubble that everyone thinks. Like a lot of people are comparing it to the real estate bubble. It's definitely not going to be that, I don't think. I think AI is here, it's here to stay, it's going to be a real thing. I do think that you have a bunch of companies that are going to boom and they're going to go after it. And then over time, some of them aren't going to be able to make it, just like in every other industry. And it's going to consolidate down to a few majors that are in the AI space. And that's going to reduce the amount of energy that they actually need. So I think you're going to see a boom and then a reduction going forward. But the difference between AI and housing is my 14-year-old granddaughter can use AI like a pro. And she couldn't buy a house during the housing bubble. So it has permeated every part of our society. I mean, my wife is a teacher over at Circle Middle School, and one of her big challenges is trying to figure out what students do and what they use AI to do. And so it's here, and I don't think it's going anywhere. But I do think we'll see a little bit of a bubble, and then diminishing. And the 28%, that number was thrown out there before AI hit. That number was before that, so it would be way higher than that right now. And data centers go along with AI. The number of data centers that we have to have, they take a ton of energy to run those data centers. Yes.
I don't think anywhere in your slides you showed anything about solar energy.
So let's go back in. So, this is why I don't do power. Okay, so the renewables that are up there, so the renewables include everything. They include wind, solar, biofuels, they include firewood, they include dung, it includes everything that's considered a renewable resource that's there. And so you can see between 2018 and 2050 what they're estimating the growth is going to be, going from 15 to 28%. But when it comes to wind and solar, there's a lot of times when I go into high schools or schools and talk to them, a lot of times what I'll start with a question and I'll say, how many of you think we're this close to transitioning off of fossil fuels and onto renewable sources of energy? How many of you think we're this close? Raise your hands if you think we're this close. Okay, good, you were listening today. And I'll ask them that question. And, it used to be kids all over the place raise your hand. Now, like I said, the conversation is changing. It's changing in my presentations. Now I'm going to ask the same room in the class, and there'll only be one or two kids that will raise their hand. Everybody else, they've heard it. They know it. But the second question that I asked them that pertains to yours, second question I asked them is, okay, so right now, out of 100% total energy in the world, how much energy do you think, out of 100% energy in the world, what percentage do you think comes from wind and solar right now? Wind and solar combined, right now, what percentage? You want to guess?
3%.
You nailed it on the head. 3% of total energy in the world right now comes from wind and solar. And so wind and solar are here. They're going to be a part of our lives. Some places they're great. Some places they're wonderful. We have wells that are running here in Kansas. They're running off of solar because it's much cheaper to run it off of solar than it is to build a transmission line to get electricity from somewhere else to it. And so, there are places where it makes sense. There are places in some of these poorer countries where I was talking about where you don't have the community is so scattered that you don't have the ability to build an electric grid to get them electricity. But you can give every one of them a solar panel that goes on their house. Our energy secretary, Chris Wright, who I've met a couple times now, he has a program called Bettering Human Lives. And one of the things that they do is they go into African nations that are people that are cooking on dung and firewood and those biofuels, and they make a deal with them where they sell them give them a propane tank that has, then they give them a card, and it's got a rate on it, like a meter on it, And so they swipe their card and then they turn it on and they use however much gas they need to cook, and they pay for it as they go. They don't have to buy a whole canister, because they can't afford to buy a whole canister, but they can afford to do this one cooking. And then next week they can afford to do this one. And so it's, there are places where wind, solar have their place. But as far as wind and solar being able to replace natural gas and oil and nuclear and coal, we're not even close. In fact, in the United States, it's estimated, MIT did a study, and they said that if you wanted to replace all the electricity that's needed right now in the United States with wind, you would have to put a wind turbine on every single acre between the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains. Every single acre would have to have a windmill on it to be able to produce enough electricity to power the United States. So, they're going to be a part of our lives, but you're seeing a huge drop off in both of those industries right now, predominantly because the subsidies have been taken away. And that's one thing that we do advocate for here with Kansas Strong. I don't have any problem with any energy source that's out there. I just want us all to play on an even playing field. Because when you add subsidies to any energy source, I don't want subsidies for the oil industry. I don't want subsidies for the coal industry. I don't want subsidies for wind or solar. Because what do subsidies do? They artificially inflate energy prices. And that hurts the poorest people in our communities. Yeah.
This has been a while back, and evidently it hasn't taken off, but we have all these landfills, and is it methane gas that builds up? And I know some communities have tapped into that and use that for energy.
Yeah, and that's a very fast growing field, actually. It's happening in a lot of places. So, you go to any landfill, you see these pipes that are just like jutting out of the ground. And you're like, what are those pipes for? And those pipes are there in the past to release the gas. And most of the time it's methane gas. And so methane gas, a lot of people don't understand. Natural gas is methane, ethane, propane, and butane all mixed together. That's what natural gas is. And we try and pull as much propane out. We try and pull as much butane out as we possibly can, because you can sell them at a higher price. So when you turn on your stove at home, you're using predominantly methane and ethane with a little bit of propane and butane mixed in. That's what's coming out of your gas stove. So methane is a powerful energy source, and every living organism, every bioorganism produces methane. You produce methane. If you haven't produced methane, you need to go see your doctor, because you're supposed to gas from time to time, okay? But everyone produces methane. Cows produce methane, and that's a big deal. Interesting. Which end of the cow does most methane come out of? Front end. Most people think that it's coming out the back end of the cow, but most methane from a cow comes from its mouth, because they have 4 stomachs and they chew the cud. Methane comes from the breaking down of organic material. So as they chew the cud and they bring it back up into their mouth and chew it, it releases methane. And they put it in the next stomach and they bring it back up, and it releases more methane. So they release more methane from their mouths than they do from the other end. Just a little side note. But anyway, all organic material releases methane. And so there is a lot of methane that's produced in a dump that takes place. And what you're seeing dumps that are starting to process what comes into the dump differently to try and localize that methane so that they can extract it. And you're seeing they'll find ways to cap their dumps to be able to capture that methane and build systems to be able to process it and then utilize it. That is moving forward. It's slow paced because it's expensive. It's expensive, and the return on the investment is very long term, because it's a lot of upfront costs. It takes a lot of methane cells to pay that off.
That's why we don't hear about it.
Yeah, because it is a slow process. But were you out yet? I think so. All right. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you all for having me.